Well, good afternoon. Welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. We have plenty of seats available in the front part of the room if you would like to move towards the front. My name is Ian Crozier, and I'm very happy to be here. Today we're going to be talking a bit about local air and noise pollution and how that intersects with land use planning. We have a fantastic panel, experts and professionals with deep knowledge in different angles on this issue. And so we are going to hear from today Dr. Chris Johnson, who is a senior social research health scientist, which I find hard to say, with Seattle King County Public Health. Will tell us a bit about the health impacts of living in areas impacted by air and noise pollution. Dr. Christine Bay, Associate Professor at the UW College of Built Environments, will share some of her research on this issue. Andrea Petzel, Principal and Founder of Broadview Planning, will share her experience working with the City of Bellevue as they grappled with these issues during the periodic update. And finally, Rachel Miller will share mitigation strategies for situations in which the impacts can't be avoided, and so want to make the best of it. And then again, I am Ian Crozier. I work with Rachel at Makers Architecture and Urban Design. I'll be your moderator. And I have a few slides here at the beginning to set the stage for the discussion. So this image here is an aerial photo of something you see very often in Washington. It's probably familiar to you. We have lots of highways, and we often build a lot of buildings right up next to the highways, and often even higher density housing and many other types of things right up next to the freeway. This is a problem. It's a problem because heavy traffic roadways and airport flight paths, which have a similar set of issues, are well-documented sources of localized air and noise pollution. Localized meaning that we're talking about hundreds of feet or thousands of feet. The effects drop off as you move away from it in pretty quick order, especially with roadways. But these types of pollution are known health hazards for folks that spend a lot of time in these areas, especially within 500 feet of roadways, for instance. And this is a problem also because zoning maps in many jurisdictions in Washington state allow or even encourage sensitive uses such as high-density housing, schools, health facilities, daycare, senior housing next to those highways and flight paths, while at the same time prohibiting them in safer areas. This is not a NIMBY session. This is a pro-housing session, but this is not a pro-housing in environmentally impacted areas session. We want to be judicious. These issues have been, I think, getting increasing coverage in the media, which has been really encouraging to see. I encourage you to look these stories up. I thought they would be links that you could download, but it seems not to be the case. But I put our emails, and I hope you're all okay with that, in the final slide of Rachel's presentation, and so you can take a picture of that and then email us, and we can send you links for the sources that are used throughout the presentation. This matters because there's about 250,000 Washingtonians that live in census blocks where the center point of the census block is within 500 feet of a freeway. There's hundreds of thousands of folks that live in Puget Sound residents that live in air and noise quality impact areas near SeaTac Airport. These areas are densely populated and racially diverse compared to other parts of the state. And we, as not everyone's an AIC planner, but if you're a planner, and especially if you're an AICP planner, you have a code of ethics which applies to these situations. And in particular, some of the principles which our code of ethics say we aspire is to consider the long-range consequences of past and present actions, including their unintended consequences. Also to incorporate equity as a foundation of planning, and to systematically and critically analyze ethical issues that come up while planning. And also to recognize our unique responsibility to eliminate historic patterns of inequity and environmental injustice that are tied to planning decisions in zoning documents and land use plans. You could think of this as a sort of companion session to yesterday's racially disparate impacts session. if you so choose. We don't want to pick on any particular city, just want to show some examples that this is just a really widespread practice in Washington State. You open up a zoning map, you may be able to tell where the freeways are just by finding the high density zones. And so not surprisingly, these areas tend to be more densely populated very often. The darker colors here showing higher population density census blocks, often next to freeways again. And also not surprisingly, these areas tend to have a higher share of people of color relative to other areas. Again, the darker colors have a larger share of non-white residents. Just one last slide here. And if these issues come up again during the Q&A, that's fine, but just want to cover some things right off the bat. One thing you might hear is that electrification is going to make this a null issue. It's not going to matter. And it's going to help. It's going to help a lot, which is great. But the airplanes, right, are not going to be electrified in the short term. Electric vehicles produce almost as much noise, especially above 20 miles per hour, as gas-burning vehicles. So noise pollution continues to be an issue. And entire particulates, as it turns out, are one of the main components of this localized air pollution. And electric vehicles have tires and also produce that result. We know also that we're in a housing shortage. People have limited choices where to live, and often the places where apartments are allowed is very limited, and these other sensitive uses as well are not allowed in many areas. So saying that, yeah, someone chose to live next to a freeway is problematic. And then just that, it's not going to kill you. And in fact, I live right next to a freeway, and I'm in pretty good health. But we know, and Chris is going to tell us more about the long-term health impacts. Increasingly, we know more and more about these long-term health impacts. And so I want to take this into consideration. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Chris.
Thank you. And let me see. Make
Over
sure
here with that one. See, there's a little switch on the top to turn that one on.
And you're going to load my slides for me.
And here they are.
Pretend it's not related to age. I'm older than I look. So first I want to explain to you that part of how this came about was this Washington State Legislature asked Public Health Seattle and King County in 2019 to do a study of community health and airport operations related pollutions, which are mostly air pollutants and noise pollution. And they asked us to do a review of the literature, gray and peer-reviewed literature, and assess the strength of the evidence. So how does this harm our health, if at all? Look at community health in a descriptive fashion. What does the population look like now? Do they have more health problems than others? And then recommend next steps. Let me get all my equipment lined up here. So I want to start with the basics and not assume that you know. So Ian mentioned, the ground transportation. So when we talk about airport operations, we're talking about the airplanes and our airplane exhaust. We're also talking about vehicles to and from the airport. Basically, right, if you're within 500 meters of a running car, you're breathing in black carbon. And then we've got traffic and mechanisms going on at the airport. So the number of air pollutants that we're exposed to from airplane exhaust is a long list. And you remember carbon monoxide, right? We get dizzy, we have trouble breathing, we pass out, and then we die. Not all of them are that serious, but there's stuff going on. It is mostly, again, from the airplane exhaust because we're burning fossil fuels. There's been some research by folks at the UW that show that it is more prevalent at landing because they're coming in longer and slower, whereas for takeoffs, to try and avoid the noise, they're going straight up. I'm theorizing that, but we're seeing it more when in landings than in takeoffs. So the pollutants that the National Academy for Sciences is really worried about and watching is particulate matter and ozones. And the particulate matter that is regulated is coarse and fine, it basically gets into our lungs and causes respiratory issues, similar to ozone. Ultrafine particulate matter is really small and not regulated, and I'm more worried about it. So particulate matter at 2.5 is really, really small, right? So a cell of our hair, it's microscopic compared to one cell. So the ultrafine particulate matter is really, really small. Small enough, we now know from animal studies, that it penetrates the cell barrier, gets into the bloodstream, and causes inflammation in brains, lungs, and heart. So where we're worried, when the plane is below 3,000 meters or feet, 3,000 feet, then the air pollutants are dropping. And again, the UW researchers, the state legislature also funded them to look at this and learn about UFP. So a lot of this knowledge is coming from the University of Washington work. So from 3,000 feet, the pollutants are coming down. Above that, then those pollutants are contributing to climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. We are focusing here on airport communities within a 10-mile radius. Let me just use that definition for the purposes of this talk. There is also damage, perhaps, right, or risk to workers, airport workers. And if fuel leaches into the soil, it can affect ecosystems, but that's outside of this talk. So let's just note that. And then the noise. It was interesting to me that the health effects for noise are as serious, and the mechanism is primarily lack of sleep and chronic stress and annoyance. But there's enough studies that we know that noise pollution causes changes in children's reading scores, declines in their reading scores. And then there's not as many studies, but a lot of studies to show that it affects adult memory loss. When I talk about likely causing something or causing something, I want to tell you what that means. And the standards, and I'm representing a team, so I should just acknowledge that. And their names are on the paper, and I can send you a link to that if you'd like. So the evidence, when we talk about something causing something, it means we have a number of high quality, rigorous studies done by multiple teams, so not the same people. And these are often large birth cohort studies. For example, there's a team that did a recent study around LAX with a birth cohort, and they were able to control for maternal factors related to harm, like whether or not I smoke, whether or not I got prenatal care. They were also able to control for vehicle pollution. So they could isolate and say, and what they found was that exposure to ultrafine particulates and fine particulates increased the odds greatly of preterm births. And in fact, the more recent the exposure and the more prolonged the exposure, the greater the odds of preterm births. The other studies, right, so if we say causal, we also have enough studies that we know that these alternative explanations have been ruled out. And then biological pathways are supported by evidence, usually from those animal studies. Likely causal means all the same is true, but we have some concerns. We weren't right. There may be some co-pollution going on. We haven't ruled out everything. And then the others we're not really going to talk about. So this picture, I just want to give you an image of across air pollution and noise pollution. The organs that you see in color are where we have threat of harm from air pollution and noise pollution airport operations. And I'm just gonna move on, and you can let me know if you want to talk more about that later. So one of the questions we asked, are local communities near airports exposed to noise and air pollution? Well, yes. We learned from the UW study that ultrafine particulate matter is falling down, because that was a question. There's a Beacon Hill study showing that noise levels were over the recommended levels. Let us note that the FAA has a higher, they allow more noise than does the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization has lower thresholds for noise tolerance in their definitions. Puget Sound Clean Air did a study showing that their EPA recommended levels are over the air pollutants are over the EPA recommended levels. And then there's multiple other studies, right? Seattle is not unique in any way. Boston, Chicago, lots of people have this issue. This is a quick summary of the UW study, and they've got a great website and a policy brief. But basically, in Seattle, flights are coming mostly from the north and the south because of the water and the mountains, and there's not a lot of places that they can go. What this study showed, they did fixed site monitoring, and then they also drove around and did measuring. So they validated measures. It turns out you can actually tell the difference between airplane exhaust air pollutants and ground transportation pollutants based on the size of the particles and the correlation with black carbon. Airplane exhaust has less black carbon for some reason. And they also pointed out the equity issues, that we need to think about who lives near airports, because what we found out when we did the descriptive analysis in Seattle and King County, the majority of our people of color live within 10 miles of the airport. 75% of Black and African American and African born, and I think it was 73% of Hispanic Latino populations live within 10 miles of the airport. They're also more likely to be immigrants, and there's a slightly higher but significantly higher portion of children that live within 10 miles of the airport. So we have the noise issue has been shown in other ways as well. And Dr. Edmund Cito kindly donated, shared this slide with us. When they did this this national study and looked at exposure to noise, they found across all measures using national data that Hispanic groups are more disproportionately impacted by noise pollution. Again, so this is a quick summary of what we found. So this is a descriptive look. So how are the people living in those airport communities doing right now? And what we found is, I mentioned that they're home to a majority of our people of color. They face disparities in health outcomes, risk factors, and resources. So they're more likely to be living in poverty, as are the adults and children. The adults are more likely to be uninsured and also more likely to report that they did not get medical care because they could not afford it. You've got higher rates of asthma. You had a higher rate of hospitalization from diabetes, heart disease, and stroke and asthma compared to the rest of the county. So these increase risk levels, right? Because if I have asthma and then I'm exposed to air pollution, I'm more likely to have a severe episode and have to go to the hospital than someone who doesn't have asthma. So that's how these are risk health factors. And then if I have less resources, I can't pay for my own mitigation measures. I can't put a HEPA air filter system in my house as easily as someone else might be able to. For some of the measures, health outcomes worsened with proximity to the airport. That just means that, right, so the closer you got, when you're within 1 mile of the airport, your life expectancy, for example, is 5 years lower than the rest of the county compared to those that live within 5 to 10 miles from the airport. Their life expectancy was only 2 years lower. We know that the disparities have systemic roots, like from redlining, and the image that you see on the right is from a Seattle Times article. We also know that facing systemic racism and oppression leads to health effects that are worrisome. The chronic stress can lead to hypertension, high blood pressure, other heart conditions, and depression and anxiety. So our recommendations in the report are very general and big because it's going to take everyone to fix this solution. It also is hard to regulate airports. For example, the FAA determines flight plans, not the airports and not the airlines. So it gets really messy, like taxiing, right? One of the things we want to do is let's not have any planes taxi, because that's just air pollution going out, right? Well, that's hard to do if you don't get the FAA involved. So our recommendations are to absolutely address the health disparities of airport communities. One of the things we can do right now is try and get everybody on insurance, shore up the health of people in airport communities. Then we need to keep mitigating the health impacts, which means prevent and intervene. and then continue to develop ways. So for example, the UW team I mentioned, I call them the UW Move Up team, but it's the Environmental and Occupational Sciences is their department. They've looked and shown that putting portable HEPA air filters in classrooms really does mitigate air pollution, because one of the other things they found is that the air pollution inside of schools is the same as outside the schools when those schools are located in that 10-mile radius. So the air pollution is penetrating. We also need to systemically monitor the pollutants, especially UFP, because that's not happening. And then we need to support research to address our gaps in knowledge, because we don't know enough about how much exposure leads to these really serious health effects. We know it happens, but we don't know how much. Like if I'm exposed to air pollution for 5 years, am I gonna get hypertension? Well, that's the level of detail that we need to investigate, but we know that harm's being done. So there's reason for us to act. And then I'm gonna hand it over to the next presenter.
Great.
Thanks, Christine. And thanks for being here on a nice afternoon.
All right, so you're up, and sure that's selected. I use that one. Slide up, switch up. Okay, that should do it, and this is working. Okay, cool. So you can use. Oh, you got your timer. Great.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to talk about near road air pollution. This is I'm a faculty member at University of Washington, and Ian and a couple of others to assistants are here. Nice to meet you here. The study I started studying this one is about 20 years ago, and nobody really gave me any attention. Research and had fun and get published and cited a few times, and then my faculty colleagues don't give me a damn. So this is the picture that I was looking at this health studies coming from environmental health and occupational health, those areas, and begin to notice that dust, very fine level of dust is harmful for human health. And then I begin to think about all this changes happening around in planning. So you all know about the AICP 1991, and in Washington State we have the Growth Management Act in 1990, which changes our built environment substantially. So what does that mean? And in density is increasing, more people to live there, and more people are working there, more people enjoy the sidewalks, and more people will travel by bicycle, and so forth, and use buses. So it means that air pollution will be there, and the more people will be exposed to air pollution on the street, inside the cars, outside the cars, and schools, your homes, etc. So I get to carry on and looking at this. At the time, there was no set terminology, so my initial study about the freeway air pollution check, acronym FAPS, and then other people begin to use a lot of research is grounded from Southern California and Northern California. They get to use traffic-related air pollution, and later on, when issues are dispersed more, and people use near-road air pollution. These are all meaning the same thing. And Chris mentioned about the air pollutants. There's a federal Clean Air Act passed in 1970s, and it has 6 criteria pollutants. So federal law, there are 6 criteria pollutants, which is only 6 pollutants federally regulated. And when they choose these 6, they found their criteria is all pollutants are found in 50 states. So that has a health impacts, but those 6 criteria pollutants are regulated under Clean Air Act since 1970 and still persist. So some made a big progress, such as sulfur dioxide, lead, and carbon monoxide are almost in compliance almost everywhere, certainly our areas. And then 1980s, researchers found that ozone is really killing people and reduce the lung size of the children, etc. So that research is focusing on ozone and nitrogen oxides and those air pollutants. From 1990s, what I see is that people pay more attention to particulate matter, which is small dust. And dust has different sizes. So size regulates PM10 is 10 micrometer, PM2.5 is 2.5 micrometer in diameter. So I'll talk about ultrafine a little bit later. These are the 6 criteria pollutants and on the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, and it has concentration levels in 24-hour annual average and different kind of criteria. And health effects are, I listed only few, there are thousands of them related to that. So as the time goes by, these criteria gets stringent and level of concentration gets lower. For instance, ozone and the PM2.5 is also changes to 24-hour concentration is 35 microgram per cubic meter, and annual mean is 12 microgram per cubic meter. So as Chris said, PM particulate matter is really very small. So PM10 is how big is it? One human hair is usually 1/7 or 1/5 of a human hair is the size of a PM10. So when you pluck your hair and split it to 5 to 7 and you get the 1, and then you split further to 4 times, there will be PM2.5. So Chris said ultrafine particles, UFP, what does that mean? This is so small, you cannot draw a picture. You cannot show it in an image. If you that's something and you saw it, and that's already too big. So that level of small micros level is penetrating. You breathe it and penetrating your everywhere and travel around your body through bloodstream, and it results in massive scale of number of diseases and almost all organ sectors. So going back to my case studies, and I focused on Seattle because we are located here, and there are not a lot of case studies done. So first one was a freeway air pollution shed, and second cyclist exposure to air pollution, and then pedestrian exposure to air pollution, and another study is going on other downtown locations. So this is inspired by Southern California's public health research showing that a lot of particles are concentrated along the freeway. So within 100 meter, which is about 330 feet, 2/3 of them dispersed. So if you are closer to freeway because of land scarcity, Southern California doesn't have growth boundaries, but they do have much higher density than our areas. So you see a lot of houses are built and along the freeway, and this was the concern of the UCLA Public Health and collaboration with USC. So we applied that to our incidences and who live there and what kind of facilities are out there, and we've zeroed in kind of a vulnerable population and vulnerable land uses. So we looked at from the freeway center to 330, from the edge 330 feet, using census block groups, and did a population analysis and GIS analysis. And this is the map of the red line, that's where the data is in, and compared to outside the freeway air pollution shed. Guess what? So quite a bit of things we are not that surprised, but Along the freeway, different types of people concentrated. Some areas have more minorities, some areas have more elderly population, some areas have two combinations in one location. All vulnerable population land uses are concentrated. Where was it? Just crossing I-90 and I-5. So downtown location, you see this red mark here is the people who are young, old, and minority population is concentration in that location. And look at the those concentration with the urban growth boundary, people who are living within urban growth areas. And the last column is showing what concentration level. If it's above 1, there are more higher concentration of those population groups. So you see that more of a non-white population, people who are below poverty, and English is their second language, has less educated population is found in King County. And in Pierce County, the concentration level was much higher than King County. So that was the first research in showing that schools, daycare centers were there, senior citizen housing is also located there, minority low-income population is located there. And the study shows that after 1990, housing density increases and minority concentration was also increased. Second case study, I don't think a lot of that. So when you are on bicycle, you have exposed to air pollution, noise pollution, and the safety is an issue. So triple load of burden is located there and bicycle facilities. And the experiment measuring is because of there is no official data, we use this combination of ethylometer AE51, which measuring black carbon levels, and use of GPS. And Andy Hong, then my graduate students, use bicycles in that road in this map. You see that this is the designated route, and the route choice is showing different traffic combination, different bicycle facilities, and surrounding land uses. So you see from the segment, it has facility type, land use, and traffic volumes are shown here. And what it shows is that different land use, different traffic volumes actually responds to showing the black carbon concentration level. And you will say, why do you measure black carbon? That's not a particular matter. Yes, because we had to do this because there was no portable machine available to measure black carbon particular matter. So black carbon as a surrogate. There was morning and afternoon concentration is different, and the activities, what is happening in that area is having an effect to air pollution concentration. So construction work in industrial and commercial land uses matters. And in terms of facility types, shelters, shared bicycle lanes have the same risk of exposure as roadways, and different kind of built environment can actually reduce air pollution exposure to levels. The third is bicycle pedestrian exposure to air pollution, the case of international school. So study purpose is the same. Here we want to measure 3 times, and morning, midday, and the afternoon, 1 hour pedestrian route. And this is Deb Singha. He was my graduate student then. So again, at the time didn't have the machines, but I didn't want to use black carbon again. So I contacted the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, and they lended us the so-called Harvard impact factor in a backpack. So you have to see this white pipe coming out. So there's the air intake, and the machine is hidden in the backpack, and the GoPro will capture image of the surrounding built environment, human activity, and vehicular movement. So this is the set route in King Station and close to International District was my location around that time there. So what we found is that there's a seasonal variation. Winter was the pollution concentration was higher than springtime. Morning level was higher than evening level, and either case, winter or spring. And when we compared the official monitoring site, which called fixed site monitors, which means that where is air monitors are located, the nearest air monitor. Here is the nearest location was the Duamishi industrial site. So in this graph, the blue lines are our field data. The red is the Duamishi industrial fixed site monitors data. As you can see, patterns are almost the same, similar pattern. So fixed site monitors, the pattern is quite similar to our field level, except one location at the beginning there. In the winter and spring is the same. But the field data, actual street level, pollution level was much higher than monitoring sites pollution level. The last one is still developing, so experimental stage of as time goes by, there are smart portable monitors are available. So this one is one of those, AirBeam 2, which is palm size, so you can put it in your hand and connect through app, and you download the air casting map app. So mount it with the GoPro, and you will see the graph map, and then kind of how much the surrounding air pollution level is like. So you can see while you are walking, and you can also record those concentration level, and you can, after the session is over, and you come home, and you can download those data. So this was pre-COVID and somehow COVID, and other type of graduate work intervened between Boyang and me, so we got stuck there, but it was still a fun idea that we want to explore even further. So this is what air casting is showing while you are measuring those handheld portable air beam. And in this case, the yellow is slightly elevated the pollution level, and some labs have unhealthy level of PM 2.5 concentration. So Boyang was Chinese, so he was interested in what happened in China. So China was the levels were off the chart, so it shows like this. So this experiment, we compare South Lake Union and south of downtown location. In this, and then we want to compare nearby monitoring sites. And similar type of research is showing what we see here is our field data is showing again higher than most of fixed site monitoring data in Duamish and Beacon Hill location. Top level is maximum level is much higher than the most of the case, so the peak is really high, and the neighborhood activities, construction site, whether there's a passing near the restaurants, and whether there's a truck, food truck is nearby, bus stops, all these things that elevate PM2 particular matters concentration level. So in here, northern route, South Lake Union was higher than West Lake, and there was there's more human activities. PM 2.5 level was higher, and there was a nearby construction site is also elevated. Construction increased a lot of dust, and it is coming out from the drilling machine. One interesting thing was at the time when it was not planned. we went there and we found this, oh my God, there is a farmer's market in front of Amazon headquarters. So 모양이 nice swing by the location. And here is the maximum concentration is detected when we passing by this mystery way, the salmon barbecue corner. So when it happens and you enjoy barbecue, but then PM 2.5 level was really high. So next phase of going to south of downtown, and which is 3rd Street, 3rd Avenue, and Pike Place Market in those locations. So our route is coming down to Pike Place Market, walk down and going back like this. And here the PM 2.5 level was higher than South Lake Union, and 3rd Avenue was the mostly highest of all locations. What happened is that this human activities in front of King County District Court was it's a bit unsafe to walk around. But I went there. The poem was following me, so I wasn't really afraid of that. So there was a lot of people that smoke. They sit down and smoking that increases the PM 2.5, and a lot of activities of large vehicles that uses diesel engines is also elevated the street level of air pollution. So my time is up, but altogether, what we see is we all look at the land use and other type of serious industrial activities that may be related to air pollution level. But what we didn't really emphasize is human activities. So what is happening on the street is also important for the pedestrian health and the people who are living there. There are a lot of unknowns because we don't have systematic data that we can gather and analyze the surrounding environment. Another one, that's it. Yeah, so I will ask me questions. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's on to me. I'm Andrea Petzel. I'm with Broadview Planning. I'm going to try to go a little bit quickly because this is a lot of very intense information, and I'm really curious to hear how this lands with all of you. So I'm going to talk quickly about our recent work with the City of Bellevue, air quality. Yeah, I might want that. And land use planning, review of the literature on high volume roadways, health effects, and mitigation strategies. Took a lot to get to that title. I will say that Dr. Valerie Pacino, who's my coworker and colleague, she's the primary author on this, and I'm kind of a poor substitute, but I will do my best. And I also want to point out Gwen Rousseau in the audience, who is with the City of Bellevue, who was our champion in Bird Dog. This is a kind of a difficult and a big deal for Bellevue to take this on, and I just applaud you, and we had a good time working on this. But the words that come up the most were grapple and wrestle and struggle with some of these things that came out of this. So this report was really about research literature on impacts, pollutants, stuff folks have already talked about, so I don't have to get too into that. But what is, for me, what I want to talk about is the context of Bellevue and kind of what we learned in taking all the standards and applying to Bellevue. And then we kind of wrapped up this report with looking at best practices, having some mitigation, and lots of other interesting stuff that Rachel will follow up with me on afterwards. So I think I can do it here, yeah? Okay, so I want to say, frankly, we don't have a lot of answers right now. And if you really want to look to places where this stuff is not in the abstract, it is in California. And that's where we pulled a lot of our information from. So they are really looking at the implications of the research and the data and what that means for public policy. I know people go immediately to housing, but there are other implications around policy considerations. So, you know, land along freeways, highways tends to be cheaper, and there's a huge demand for things like housing. There's also a lot of historic environmental injustice along these air corridors, and so it's figuring out that balance and what we want out of projects that can help to mitigate those effects. So this was born out of Bellevue's environmental stewardship plan, and the final report will be part of their comp plan EIS, as well as kind of helping to inform the decision-making along the Wilmerton area, and there's some area plan that's happening there around the light rail station. Gwen's gonna correct me on anything I get wrong. So, what do we mean by high volume roadways? 100,000 annual average trips, daily trips. So that's basically Bellevue. And you can see particularly right there between West Bellevue and Woodridge, that's where there is really high volume roadways, 200,000, 206,000 trips, daily trips. So basically all of these roads have impacts. And we've talked a little bit about highly impacted communities. What we used for this was the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency's definition, which is geographic locations characterized by degraded air quality, residents who face economic or historic barriers to participating in clean air decisions and solutions. So you can see South King County is really where the impacts are. So I don't want to, not acknowledge that, but you will see that within this context circled there are Wilburton and Factoria, which are the two Bellevue neighborhoods. So we did not take a macro level at this. We really went micro and looked at these two neighborhoods because that's also where all the development is happening. So we've talked a lot about what we mean by air pollutants and their sources. We've talked about the things about burning fossil fuels. We've talked about particulate matter. In general, the trends for air quality we're improving. We have things like the Clean Air Act. But if you don't look at things like the ultrafine particulate matter, you kind of miss that trends where things are not improving. And in the context of these high volume roadways, it's the brake and tire dust, things that are not gonna necessarily be solved by electrifying fleets, and also on-off ramps. That's where we're seeing starting and stopping, and that's where you have a lot more impacts from ultrafine particulate matter. So, when you think about it from a policy perspective, what do we want to do, and how do we build these projects that can help mitigate and address these issues? Okay, so this is a little bit of pollutant concentrations and rates of dispersion. We pulled it from some previous work to make this applicable for our work in Bellevue. So what you see along that x-axis is the distance in feet for a buffer, because that's really the first thing folks think of when you think of mitigating for impacts is a buffer. And then along the other axis, the y-axis, we have more concentrated, less concentrated. So if you follow the blue line, that's the concentration of pollutants like carbon monoxide, you'll see they drop off pretty dramatically when you get to 1,000 feet away from a roadway. Other things like air toxins, nitrous oxides, they have a less rapid decay, that's the green line. There are some, the orange line, that show no evidence of decay. And then when you look at things like ozone, they actually increase the further away that you get from a roadway. So this is a really challenging scenario to try to develop a buffer for, right? Like, what do you do? California used 500 feet, so we decided to use 500 feet as our kind of best practices for how you can mitigate and create buffers. Talking a little bit more about land uses along high volume roadways. You can see an eighth of Bellevue's land area falls within that 500 feet. We gotta get some different colors. Red is the 500 feet, magenta is the 1,500 foot highway buffer, which I would say would be a dream. So in addition to that, about 8,500 people, about 6% of the population live there, and about 40,000 people, 25% of Bellevue's workforce work within that 500 foot buffer. We've talked again about sensitive populations, kids, infants, expecting mothers, older adults, people with diabetes or any other kind of medical condition, folks, low-income folks who have faced historic discrimination. So obviously protecting the health of residents and workers is a city's greatest concern, really, and you have to really think about what you're gonna do when you're faced with decisions about cheap land, a housing shortage. Where do you put the land uses and the things that needs to happen in order for a city to grow? So housing is at the forefront, but for us, I think one of the things that really stood out for us was an issue around a daycare center. So those are the other sensitive land uses. And I don't want to talk about specific locations, but there's a daycare, there's a food bank, there's some other services that are within incredibly close proximity to the freeway. You think about on-off, making it easy for parents to drop their kids off, right? And then it's ease of access, but children and infants face the highest impacts because they have rapidly forming lungs. Their rates of ventilation are much greater than adults. And so you put this very sensitive use that is not put there, along with incredibly close proximity to a freeway. So what do? You also have a daycare shortage, right? You can't necessarily shut down a daycare. Could they afford to move? How do you message this to this community? So I do not want the implications for communications to be lost in this, because this can be sometimes scary and frightening stuff. And there could be a whole session about health policy communications, but it's something that we definitely face, and I think the city is still grappling with. How do we put this out in the public and not scare people to death, and also say, hey, Bellevue's not open to development? That's kind of something that we're really grappling with. So I think that's, back. Okay, so mitigation strategies. I'm at 8 minutes. I think I'm gonna let Rachel talk a little bit about this more. We talked about buffers, we talked about, there's noise barriers, trees, urban design is a great way to try to get at some of this mitigation, freeway lids. A lot of this stuff is really expensive, right? A lot of the stuff we're already at a place where we can't retroactively put these things in. There are some places, like hopefully along in the Wilburton area, you can use some forms of urban design to get at mitigation strategies. And I think that is yet to come. We're very excited to see that when the Wilburton area rolls up. So I talked really fast, but I really want to get to the Q&A. I'm really gonna hand it over to Rachel for her to talk about hers next.
Thanks, Andrea. And just while you had that slide up, I'll note that those are some of the large scale urban design features that you can do, but I'll focus more on the small scale ones. Okay, so you've heard a lot about what the health impacts are, that this is a problem, that space near roadways or near airports, they're problematic. So what can we do? We happen to have 2 projects recently that had to grapple with these issues. So we want to say there are some mitigation measures that we've put into these plans already. So again, the 500-foot buffer, it's something California uses. There are things that drop off within those 500 feet. We can do that. No sensitive uses there. That's something we put in Bothel's Canyon Park zoning. In Burien, we have both an airport community and we have high volume roadways. So we have both. So I'm going to talk more about zoning in a couple slides. We are doing a planned action ordinance in actually both of these communities, and I want to give a shout out to Burke as well, because they led the SEPA environmental analysis, and that gave us a path to really think about this. And the planned action ordinance itself has language in it that asks for these site planning techniques that I'll talk about later. One thing I want to mention there also is a focus on indoor spaces, so especially community spaces. I love parks, I love public space, but maybe a Boys and Girls Club or a recreation center is actually what you need when you have an airport community, being indoor where you can control the environment. I'm not going to talk about those later, so I wanted to mention that on this slide. So what can we do with zoning? There are 2 things, land use compatibility and form. So Andrea and everybody else have talked about sensitive uses. I'm just gonna highlight that daycare thing again. We talked with the licensing department of the state of Washington. Children are required to go outside 2 times a day. They have to be in that air. And Christine talked about how the indoor air quality, unless the building is very well sealed, is also the same as outside. We heard from Child Care Aware, the folks there, and the licensing department for the state. They said, we are looking to public health officials and planners to put this in their zoning. They want to see it there so that they can have clear guidance on what to do. So the second piece of zoning is turbulence. So I know that for me, that makes me think of a bad airplane ride, but we actually want turbulence in our cities. So we want air flowing around and swirling around. That is what we want. So when you upzone a single family area and you allow for taller buildings, you are creating turbulence. That is a good thing. You want variety in city form. You want trees in there that also provide roughness and surfaces. I do want to note on this slide that vegetation that has larger surface area is really good for mitigating air pollution. So, and also maybe a little counterintuitively, evergreens or conifers with like lots of small needles have more surface area than broadleaf trees. So you want the lots and lots and lots of needles and stuff blocking the air, capturing the air that the particles can land on and then get washed away with rain. Okay, I'll focus a little bit on street design. I want to tell you though that it's not going to solve things. So quiet pavement, there is new technology coming out and about. That is always changing. There are more things that are becoming more durable. We've gotten pushback from public works departments before that this is just too costly because they're not durable. It's changing, just keep up with it. Read about it, we're in California and other places that are keeping up with it more. I do want to remind, EVs are heavy and their tires are making just as much noise as anything else, and they go fast. Vegetation, this is where I really do want to say it's not going to do that much. You really have to have a huge area of land and lots and lots and lots of trees to even make a dent, like 1% difference. So you can do a little bit, and the variety, the grasses, the shrubs, and the trees all together can help. Do work with a landscape architect or an arborist so you can meet multiple goals. The thing that I do want to mention is that layering on air and noise mitigation strategies often really help with other things you're trying to do, like stormwater and urban heat. They do everything all at once. Also, how you treat roadway air pollution with street design is different than how you treat air pollution coming from the sky. So when you're working with a roadway and the pollution is coming out of the vehicles, you don't want to trap that air. So you actually don't want a dense canopy overhead. Whereas when the particles are coming from above, a dense canopy is great. When you have more pollution above your trees than under them, you actually want that dense canopy to capture those particulate matter. Okay, a little bit about site planning for roadway noise and air. So again, we already have a lot of housing allowed near highways and near high traffic roadways. I want to bring up Bothell because I think they have done some things pretty well here, maybe by accident, I don't know. But there's a north-south highway to the west of downtown Bothell that carries a ton of traffic. And one thing they did really well was did a multi-lane boulevard design. So that roadway is doing all kinds of cool things, green stormwater infrastructure, lots of vegetation, but it's also a slow traffic roadway. It provides about 50 feet, so it's not the 500 feet that we need or want, but it is some space, and as we saw, there's a lot of drop off, even quickly. So at least 50 feet is something, and it's got the vegetation capturing a little bit more, and then they've placed their outdoor spaces, like their courtyard, further away, so that that building face is hopefully blocking more of that air coming there, and the noise coming from the vehicles as well. Also, the ground floor commercial may be the most impacted area by noise and air, potentially, depending on how the air is flowing. And those people at least are hopefully only there, for their shift, whereas the people living in the residences are there overnight. So at least there's a ground floor commercial space that may be slightly more compatible with air and noise impacted areas. So I mentioned vegetation earlier, and again, I want to say that you really need a lot of vegetation for it to really have an impact, and that the tree species matter. I talked about the surface area. You need a lot of area, a big expanse, and a lot of size. But I do want to mention that there is a study showing that with 30% canopy or green cover, and they looked at both grasses and green walls and trees and everything, that there can be a reduction in PM 2.5 particles. So I know cities are kind of aiming for also a 30% tree canopy for urban heat goals. So alongside that, you could build this into your rationale for canopy. Site planning for overhead noise, and this is just some example language from our planned action ordinance in Burien, just in case you all want your own language, you can copy that. Burien, the Boulevard Park neighborhood, is in the flight path. They have a bar right there that's called Flight Path, and the idea of a canopy that also works for weather protection can also be a noise barrier. So when you have outdoor space that is going to be impacted, that's one thing to think about, is a different type of canopy design than you normally would do more there. And similarly, just in your homes or in your courtyard spaces for residential areas, think about weather protection in a different way, in a more noise insulated way than you normally would. And again, that doubles for providing shade. The other thing you can do is add white noise or desired noises, and this I think actually comes back to just how the human brain works. You have to filter out some things, so if you've got noise closer to you that's doing a little more, you might start filtering out the airplane noise or the vehicle noise. One idea is that there are some evergreen trees that have leaves year-round that are broadleaf leaves and can rustle in the wind. So the idea of rustling leaves, like I have a neighbor that has an aspen tree and I can hear those rustling. But you kind of need the wind blowing to get that rustling, but that's a nice white white noise. And then water features as well. Freeway Park, I mean, this is, I can't remember when it was designed, 70s or so, but the idea of those water fountains was to mitigate the freeway noise. And that can be done at a smaller scale on smaller sites. And then speakers with music playing or whatever, wind chimes, kinds of things. I'm not gonna talk a lot about building techniques, but it is probably the most effective thing is sealing up your building. This is actually a graphic that makers did many years ago for the Naval Air Station Whidbey Island because those jets are noisy. And interestingly, what you do to seal up a building for noise is also kind of similar with what you do to seal up a building for air. So there's some overlap there. I will leave it at that because I do think we don't want to talk with you all more and hear more from you. Do talk to the professionals. Us planners, we're not the experts. I mean, we just did this research because it was interesting. We had some projects that were, related to it. We're not the experts, to talk to the people that are. And here are some resources that you can look at the slides later. And then Ian wanted this up for our email addresses. Okay, I think we'll take questions now.
How about a round of applause for our panel? First off, okay, could you raise your hand, see who's in the room, if you are a public planner, real quick? Okay, great. How about if you're a student? Okay, and a consultant? Okay, great, yeah. How about if you live within 500 feet of a freeway? Okay, great. If you frequently hear airplane flights overhead. That's everyone. Okay, cool. So we're all. Are there any public health people in the room? Okay. Oh, great. Thank you for being here. So we are all affected by and interact with these issues in different ways. Thank you for that. Any questions out there in the audience? Mr. Bob Bingford.
As a Bellevue resident near Wilburton, I'm actually curious so what have been some of the policy or recommendations so far in Bellevue related to this issue? I'm curious.
I don't know if there really are any quite yet. When do you want to, can I drag you into this, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges has just been that we have multiple things happening in these areas. So there's 4 light railroad stations right there. So it's trying to find that balance between, what's appropriate, what's everything to take into consideration. I think that the goal is to look at, what uses can handle some of that air pollution. I think that office buildings with more sophisticated ventilation systems that are well maintained over time are safer to put near a freeway than, say, a residence that has a ventilation system right next to at every window. But there are some questions about whether we go up high. If you go up really high, does that mitigate? And if you have knowledge of seeing some public health people, but that would be good. And then just really trying to figure out how we can mitigate.
I think when I came across this building heights, higher building is like further away from the freeways. So vertical distance is also matters. So like 7 or 8 story higher up is better than the lower levels. So, but if we are doing mixed use situation and restaurant is in 2nd floor and then you are living in the 3rd floor, and that may not be an impact. But I agree with you that high quality buildings matters. So office buildings, high-rise buildings have a better system to clean their polluted air internally by recycling the air. So that's probably better than putting low income residential units.
Danielle?
Yeah. So, questions involving transit-oriented development, trails, like the Berkeley Trail, outward dining. So many times cities want to put their transit-oriented development smack dab next to freeways or highways, limited access highways. And of course, any apartments and, right? And so I'd like to hear a little more about how one might counter that.
Yeah.
And then, trails, the bike trails, with the, with the research that you did, Christina, did you take into account trails that were, when the trails are oftentimes, the trails are built next to, sometimes there's oftentimes two different unpleasant uses, highly polluting uses, right? And so you've got people biking and walking along these places, but they're purposely built between limited access highways and, say, an asphalt plant or an airport, right? Or often smack dab next to a freeway. And I'd just like to hear a little more about some of these choices that are made.
I can talk about TOD first
Yeah.
for a little bit. So in Bothell Canyon Park, that was exactly the issue, that we were absolutely trying to get TOD right at this new BRT station, actually. And that is where the 500-foot sensitive use buffer came into play. So we still allowed dense development. It was just that we said, this is gonna have a jobs focus. This is gonna be office, you're gonna have a sealed building. We're not allowing daycares, we're not allowing schools, we're not allowing hospitals. So 500 feet of that roadway is still TOD, but it's a jobs focused. And it kind of fit with that area anyways. It was already a jobs focused regional growth center. And there were other areas further from there that would work better or work well for residential. So a lateral mixing of uses made sense there. In Burien, it's not the roadway issue as much as the airport issue, but that area where we were trying, it's not as TOD focused, but it was still trying to create a mixed use center. We really were trying to encourage more like manufacturing and light industrial uses, lower intensity uses that made use of being an airport community. So again, an indoor environment that could be controlled and focusing on the community center. When you want to have an outdoor space for a community to get together, just don't do it. Don't focus on outdoor spaces in that community. Focus on indoor spaces.
And then just, and then with the Canyon Park example, like there's, like 500 feet is just, it's a pretty short distance. It's a really quick walk. So, so it's that, sort of a triage thing. You've got the worst impacts right there, and then you go a little ways away, and the park's impacts are not as bad, and you go a little further, not as bad. And so by just kind of precluding that most worst zone, then you can, you get the best bang for your buck, basically, and you can still walk within a few minutes and get to a transit stop, hopefully. Also, we have different transit stops are on the corridor, right? Maybe more or less suitable for housing. Christine, did you have anything on the trails?
Trails have a positive association with the surroundings. The people who when we use trails along the industrial area in Elliott Bay and Fremont, that side, the pollution concentration spiked. But near the university and separated the Berkeley Trail was the cleanest of all routes. So trails have we have this common perception is clean, but it's not always clean. So it's the surrounding environment, and I didn't show it here, but there is a similar study went into Seoul, South Korea, which is the density is about more than 10 times more than higher than Seattle density. In there, the little shrubs, the low rise, what is short shrubs, and that has impact to kind of exposure level is lower for the bicyclist. So that was quite interesting, and so it's novel, but using vegetation cleverly, and of course we need more empirical research to guide all planning mitigation measures. But I think roughly speaking, that is something we know right now.
Over here.
Yeah, so north of the city of Shoreline, where we've got light rail running along I-5 and upzoned right along interstate 5. I'm wondering about mitigation strategies. Have you guys found that it's most effective to include those mitigation strategies in zoning code? Have you looked at building code or other strategies for implementing those? And then a totally unrelated question, has anyone looked at pollution along like BNSF lines? Because we've got 4 highways and BNSF.
I will mention that in Burien, the noise is in their building code. So that is very common. There are also public health codes, and I don't know, Chris, if you're able to speak to that at all more, but I did come across that in the research, that these should be built into health codes, which then are, maybe it's similar to how fire codes work, I'm not sure. And then work into the building codes that way. And that would especially be for indoor ventilation systems, the ceiling, the insulation, all the building related stuff should go in building code. It's more like the land use buffers, and maybe the site planning techniques could go more in your zoning and development code and design standards.
Yeah, the only thing about railroads is that I was thinking about this. There's a lot of rail traffic over here in Dana. Is that it's like, hopefully we know that it's like, seems like more obviously polluted, and then but highways, in the roads and the airports, we just kind of feel like they're more just, we take them for granted. It's like part of our surroundings. So that's part of this session, is to raise awareness. Let's hang out. We see one in the way in the back there. Yes. Sorry about that. Yes, you.
Hi, I'm from the city of Vancouver, and we have a PDX airport very nearby, and we're about to expand the freeway that runs right through our downtown. Yeah. The I-5 bridge. So I was wondering if you might have any advice for our city as to, what should we be thinking about with the homes and the businesses that are probably going to be a lot more impacted by noise or particulate matter than I think we might have been considering.
I would
seem like there's a way to stop that.
Look at Port of Seattle's Part 150 plan and see what mitigation measures they are already doing, because they are funding noise insulation and home improvements in Boulevard Park and Burien. So look at that for some ideas, and then work with the port of whoever's running that airport, and get them working on mitigation measures.
I would also add, be out in front early and on point with your communications. Like, that's like, it's incredibly important. And that also means bringing along your city leadership, which is a challenge.
I think WashDOT also has mitigation measures for their highway projects, so make sure it's built into that as well.
We can do one more question within 45 seconds. We can be here afterwards. I've got eyes on somebody in the back, but I've got the microphone in the back.
Yeah, actually, this dovetails with what you were just saying. I was just curious how the city of Bellevue ended up doing this study. It seems like kind of unique, and was there kind of a request or concern about pollution that brought it about in particular?
We have a great environmental stewardship initiative program manager, Jen Jeffrey, who I think read about it just because it might be an issue, and so she got it into our environmental stewardship
really forward thinking and pretty stunning that a city like Bellevue would want to wade into that, and we're eternally grateful that we got to work on that with them. It was a great project, so.
Well, great. Thank you everyone so much for being here. Thank you.